So this next clip speaks about that God is everything and we are nothing except that which we are through Christ. It might contradict itself in the eyes of some people that after this I show a video on the Spartans who through discipline, hard work, sacrifice did amazing things, because for some other reason people think, well, discipline, hard work, dedication is from yourself. People must not forget that every heartbeat is from God. Every enzyme working, cell working, nucleus inside a cell working is from God. So it must be remembered that you would have no discipline. You wouldn't even be able to do the slightest thing if God does not give you the energy and also the wisdom to even know about discipline.
Nothing could be more of a contradiction of terms than an arrogant servant of the Lord. This is the great pride crusher, that you're nothing except what you are in Christ. Wherever it is God will place you in the future, you're not going to get there by yourself. It must be God who calls you out of darkness. It is God who has chosen you to be His own. It is God who has put you into Christ. It's all of God, so that no flesh will boast before Him. If God had not come after you and called you to Himself, you'd be perishing in sin, or you'd already be in hell. But it is God who has had mercy and shown you grace. And God will honor the man who is humble. God is opposed to the proud. He gives grace to the humble.
So I think it's very important to study success. What makes the great great? What makes some societies flourish and grow and others go down the tubes? So obviously the Spartans are so well known for being so disciplined and living frugally as well, not in excesses and greed and whatever. So this is a very, very important study of the most successful societies in history. Herodotus said, I think, there was a time when Sparta was very average. I think he said actually Spartans were the worst governed people of all the Greeks, till apparently they got their leader Lycurgus, I think his name is. And listen how you change a society, and also listen how you change yourself and your family.
It is said there was a time when the citizens of Sparta were not unlike any others in ancient Greece. After all, they shared a common culture, language, religion, and lifestyle, so there was really no way of being superior in anything. Herodotus even says Spartans were the worst governed people in all of Greece. That is, of course, until Sparta came under the influence of the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus. It was he who supposedly came up with the Spartan constitution, among which was the agoge, a system of education and training to be completed by every Spartan citizen. Most Greek cities also had a similar system in place, but it was Lycurgus's that was so revolutionary for its time that it allowed the Spartans to dominate everyone who dared meet them in the field, and in their prime allowed them to stand undefeated for over 150 years. In this video we will reveal the fascinating methods behind Lycurgus's innovative training system. As Lycurgus gazed upon the lazy, mediocre citizens of Sparta, he decided that his people were in need of a different concept of upbringing. At the center of this idea was his belief that healthy, disciplined, able-bodied individuals are integral to a successful and functioning society. So his system was to be extended to every young Spartan citizen, male and female. And though the girls were excluded from the more rigorous and extreme system of the agoge, they were still expected to perform the same exercises as the boys, like fighting and running, as it was believed that both parents had to be in peak condition in order to produce the best possible offspring. To our modern eyes, Lycurgus's system represents an interesting and extreme experiment. What would happen if an entire community was isolated from the rest of the world and brought up through constant discipline, physical exercise, and resistance to struggle, with these being held as a social norm and reason for existence of every individual? In theory, this would produce a perfect society of tough individuals, with built-in qualities to show respect, endure the struggles of life, and always strive for perfection. But now let us see how Lycurgus implemented his idea into a real system, and if it achieved the intended results he wanted. For the boys, the system was divided into 3 categories: children, adolescents, and young adults. The first category was very similar in idea to a modern boarding school. Young Spartans would leave their families to learn letters, music, poetry, singing, and sport. Other Greek city-states had a similar system, but relied on private pedagogues to teach their children. The Spartan system, on the other hand, was more communal, in which one man was chosen to be in charge of the boys as their paidonomos, or supervisor. This highly important role of bringing up the next generation of Spartans was only open to those who were eligible for election to the highest offices. It was the job of the supervisor to make sure young Spartans became loyal, resourceful, disciplined, and accustomed to extensive physical activity. Most importantly though, as the writer Plutarch nicely puts it, the agoge was a school of obedience. The supervisor was given power to punish the boys as he saw fit, and always commanded a group of older boys with whips to enforce his punishments. And to make sure the boys were never left without a supervisor, he allowed every citizen to take on his role when he wasn't around, and to order the boys to do whatever seemed appropriate. And yes, citizens were also allowed to punish the boys if they did anything wrong. For these reasons, the boys were accustomed to being respectful to everyone, and only spoke when spoken to. Xenophon even writes that the boys would always walk around with a low gaze, so as to not provoke anyone. This instillment of heavy discipline and respect was the first step of their training. When the boys of other Greek cities became teenagers, they were released by their pedagogues and private teachers into the world, and no one was in charge of them anymore. Spartan teenagers, however, only entered into their second stage of the agoge. Lycurgus recognized that it was in this age category, when going through puberty, that boys are the most adventurous and troublesome. So in keeping with his system, he enforced even more hardships and labor on the boys. They were to have only one cloak to stay warm all year, and had to walk barefoot in order to strengthen their feet. For Lycurgus believed that if their feet were properly accustomed, they could run faster and jump higher than anyone in footwear. At this age, they were also taught to fight with weapons and march collectively in full silence, under the rhythm of music. These silent marches would be used as a psychological weapon in battle, as most armies did not have the discipline to pull this off, and it would be offsetting for anyone to witness a seemingly emotionless and confident army face off against them. As you can probably tell by now, Spartan training was not focused on extensive muscle growth of any kind. Instead, it was aimed at improving speed, agility, and muscle memory. So we could expect the average Spartan body to not be overly muscular, but instead nimble and lean, carrying just enough weight and muscle for optimal physical performance. Complementing this point is the fact that Spartan youths were never fully sated, and were always hungry to some degree. This was all part of the second stage of their training, which ensured they were resourceful and had a high resistance to hunger and pain. Even their resistance to the cold was constantly tested, as they would bathe in the cold waters of the Eurotas River, under the concrete opinion that bathing in hot water made one a coward. The recurring theme in Lycurgus's system of rationing, training, and clothing Spartan youths was to make them more self-controlled in regard to their needs. In other words, it made the boys more content and indifferent with having less food, clothing, and personal possessions. This was in hopes that when a difficult situation inevitably does present itself, Spartan citizens would be more likely to recover and care for themselves, in comparison to other Greeks, who were accustomed to being provided with comforts and luxuries. To further discipline them, they were ordered when in public to hide their hands under their cloak, walk silently, and keep their eyes fixed on the ground. Xenophon even says you would be more likely to see a stone speak or a bronze statue turn its eyes than them, who would reserve their words for only when spoken to. When the boys grew into young men, Lycurgus focused the most time and effort on them, because he believed they were the city's greatest asset. In this stage, he especially focused on bringing out their sense of competitiveness and teamwork, for he believed this was the best way to have the men push themselves to the limit of their abilities. In today's world, this can be seen in professional sports, and Lycurgus did a great job of implementing that mindset for the purpose of war. Xenophon explains how he did this. Out of all the young men, he would assign 3 strong leaders to each handpick the best 100 among themselves to be in their team. Each of the 3 leaders would also have to give a reason for each choice and rejection. Then these leaders and their chosen groups would be pitted in various activities and battles against the very men they rejected. This resulted in a lot of competition, as each selected man wanted to prove that he belonged there, and each rejected one wanted to prove he was underestimated. We are told the contests that ensued were always fierce, with each man pushing himself for the victory of his group. Such intense competition even resulted in fistfights between the members of the groups, but were always separated and punished to remind each man that their inner contests should never be above their obedience to the law. We can imagine that their contests would extend even onto the battlefield, where although the groups stand side by side, each would strive to outperform the other and be the last to flee. Unlike with the recruitment of the Roman legions, where men were selected based on stature and strength, it can be said that each Spartan, male or female, would be in great shape as they enter adulthood, and anyone slightly shorter or slimmer than the rest would know how to compensate in speed and vigor. We can safely say Lycurgus' system made sure that every citizen was a worthy recruit for when the need arose. When the Spartans grew out of their young adulthood, they were finally relieved of physical training. But Lycurgus ensured through social norms that their readiness for battle and pursuit of excellence carried on. For example, hunting remained the most popular leisure activity for them, as it stimulated a lot of the military hardships and gave them an urge to stay physically fit and mentally aware. Marriage was also a motivator, as only when Spartans were in peak condition were they allowed to marry and have children, as Lycurgus believed this would produce the strongest offspring. He took it even further by making it frowned upon for couples to spend too much time together, as it would negatively affect their competitive spirit.